Don't think I have any major announcements. There's no midterm this week in here, and there's no midterm next week. There might be a midterm the week after next week. I'll check the syllabus. It should be in your syllabus somewhere, one way or the other. Let's think. In laboratory this week, you're doing a laboratory today on chromatography, and a laboratory on Wednesday on microscopy. We're in a section where you're sort of learning laboratory techniques, research laboratory techniques as the laboratory exercises. We're working on photosynthesis in here in lecture, and the Friday quiz this week will be on photosynthesis, on the stuff you're learning. Any questions for me? All right, well, it's one of the things, the points I've been making when I've been introducing photosynthesis is that it's kind of detailed molecularly. There's a lot of different processes going on at a molecular level for the plants to carry out photosynthesis. So brace yourself again for another lecture that's filled with lots of details. And again, thank you, Rex, for videotaping this, because I know for the more detailed the lecture, the better it is for you to be able to review it on YouTube. Okay, well, let's review a few terms from last time. The photosynthesis actually takes place inside some leaves that are located in some cells. Photosynthesis takes place in some cells that are located in the middle of the leaves. Those cells are called mesophyll cells. But it's actually, you can be more specific than that. Within those mesophyll cells are these organelles called chloroplasts, which is what you're seeing there, which is where the photosynthesis actually occurs. So I guess you could say the chloroplasts are the organelles, the units of photosynthesis. And the chloroplasts have three membranes. There are two, there we go, It's been a bad technology day. There are two smooth envelopes, two smooth membranes on the outside of the envelope. I cannot speak today. Two smooth membranes on the outside of the chloroplast, and those together are called the envelope of the chloroplast. And there's a highly folded inner membrane called the thylakoid membrane. And as you can see, the thylakoid membrane is stacked into coin-shaped discs that are called granum. So there's one granum, there's another granum. And when discussing photosynthesis, I tend to use the term thylakoid membrane and granum interchangeably. You can really think of them as essentially the same thing. Photosynthesis takes place one more term here, the stroma. The watery liquid that fills the chloroplast is called the stroma of the chloroplast. What's that? The mesophyll cells are the cells where the photosynthesis takes place. So this chloroplast you see here is inside a mesophyll cell, and the mesophyll cells are in the middle of the leaves. Okay, so photosynthesis is actually a two-step process. The first process is the one you're seeing going on right here. Sunlight shines on the thylakoid membranes, and using the energy of sunlight, the thylakoid membrane is able to produce some high energy molecules, ATP and NADPH. In other words, you say that the energy in the sunlight is changed into chemical energy, ATP molecules and NADPH molecules. And then the second step of photosynthesis is called the light-independent reaction, or the Calvin cycle, and it's a cycle which is a group of enzymes that change carbon dioxide into glucose. But that's a non-spontaneous reaction, and all non-spontaneous reactions require an energy source, and for enzymes, those energy sources are the ATP and the NADPH high-energy molecules. So in a sense, this is where the sugar is made. This is where the carbon dioxide is fixed into glucose, but the light-dependent reaction provides the energy to make the Calvin cycle turn, so to speak. All right, so then we started to get into the gory details of how the light-dependent reaction functions over there. go. What we're going to be looking at are molecules that are embedded in the membrane of the thylakoid, which is the phospholipid bilayer you see there. So all these lumpy shaped things are proteins and some non-proteins that are part of the thylakoid membrane. There we go. And one of the types of molecules that you find embedded in the thylakoid membrane is a green pigment molecule called chlorophyll. And its job is to actually capture the photons. There are, the chlorophyll, as I mentioned, the structure of the chlorophyll. The main photon catching part you see is right here. It's a system of carbon and nitrogen rings with a magnesium ion in the center. But connected to it is a long hydrophobic tail, which being hydrophobic is what embeds the chlorophyll to the thylakoid membrane. When a chlorophyll molecule is struck by light, some of the electrons in these covalent bonds can become energized. That's part of the nature of electrons, is they can absorb photons and get energy from the photon. Here's my version of the chlorophyll molecule. So when sunlight hits it, boing, one of its electrons gets energized. You can think of it as starting to bounce around. It has more kinetic energy, if you want to think about it that way. Now, in actual thylakoid membranes, chlorophyll molecules are found in clusters. They group together into these clusters, which are called photosystems. And so here on the computer screen, you see a typical photosystem, a whole bunch of chlorophyll molecules. And if you look closely, I use different colors for some of them. Here's one and here's one, slightly different colors. And that's just to denote the fact that there's actually two variations of chlorophyll that you find in plants. One's called chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. And don't worry about what the molecular distinction is between them, but just two slight different variations. But they both still absorb photons and energize electrons. When the sunlight shines on a photosystem, an electron that's energized in one of the chlorophyll molecules can be passed around to the other chlorophyll molecule within the photosystem, sort of bounces around, but eventually it gets trapped right here in the middle. There's a special pair of chlorophylls there called the reaction center, or sometimes they're just called the special pair. And it acts as a trapping center for the energized electrons. There we go. And so what happens is, eventually the reaction center is going to capture two energized electrons from the photosystem. And so once those two energized electrons are there, they get stuck there. What's going to happen next, I don't have it right here on this cartoon, is the energized pair of electrons is going to be passed into an electron transport system. And an electron transport system is a group of molecules in a membrane. And remember, what we're seeing here is part of the thylakoid membrane. All these chlorophyll molecules are in the membrane. Anyway, the electrons are going to be passed to some electron-carrying molecules within the membrane and shuttled sideways across the membrane, where their energy is going to be used, well, eventually to make ATP and NADPH. But anytime you have a situation like that, where you have molecules that can carry electrons through a membrane, that's called an electron transport system. So the reaction center is going to pass those electrons into the thylakoid membrane's electron transport system. Okay, so now we're going to get into the actual gory details of the process. So the phospholipid bilayer you see here is the thylakoid membrane. Here's the inside of the thylakoid. And who remembers the name of the watery liquid that fills the chloroplast that's out here? The stroma, right. Maybe I'll draw that. Here's the thylakoid. Here's the envelope of the chloroplast. And so the stroma is here. It's the liquid that fills the chloroplast. So what we're looking at in this drawing right here is essentially a close-up of this region right there. But the molecules I'm going to be talking about, of course, are spread throughout the entire thylakoid. There's nothing special about this corner right here. I'm just using that for illustration purposes. Okay, so this is the light-dependent reaction taking place in the thylakoid membrane, and our goal is to change the energy of sunlight into ATP molecules and NADPH molecules. And there's going to be two photosystems involved. One is called photosystem 2, and the other is called photosystem 1. And as it turns out, photosystem 2 acts first. That was just kind of a mistake that they made when they were first analyzing the light-dependent reaction. And then after photosystem 2 goes, then photosystem number 1 is going to function. All right, so let's see what happens here. The sunlight shines on the chloroplast, including the thylakoid membrane. Electrons in photosystem 2 become energized from the sunlight. And so eventually we're going to have a pair of energized electrons trapped within the reaction center of photosystem 2. Like that. All right, and the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to begin to see the electron transport system. There's going to be a molecule called plastoquinone, or PQ for short. Come on, laser work. There we go. There's going to be a molecule called plastoquinone, which is going to go up and grab these two electrons. So that's the beginning of the electron transport system, plastoquinone is, and shuttle them to this molecule right here, which is also part of the electron transport system. And that one's called the cytochrome complex. Okay, here we go. There's plastoquinone. It grabs those two electrons from photosystem 2, shuttles them to the cytochrome complex. And what's going to happen is the cytochrome complex, well, I should tell you about what structurally what it is. It's a protein